Visions Volume 2 out. We now have 18 episodes of Star Wars Visions out on Disney Plus. And I'm going to take the time and I'm going to rank all 18 episodes from Volume 1 and Volume 2 from my least favorite to my favorite. So, with that being said, let's jump on into it. What is going on, my specialist SPC here, and welcome back to the channel for a brand new video. Thank you guys so much for clicking on the video. Just if you guys are new here, please consider clicking that subscribe button, turning on the notification bell so you guys don't miss out on any future videos or live streams, and please consider giving this video a thumbs up. So guys, I gotta say, in terms of Star Wars Visions itself, I did really like the first volume that came out here a few years back. I just love the animation styles of most of them. And I'll be honest, when I reacted to the Visions 2 trailer, I was a little bit more skeptical because a lot of these episodes kind of seemed like they were a little bit more for children, in my personal opinion. But I will say, as an overall season, it wasn't bad, but to me was definitely a step down from the previous season of Visions. But now it is time for me to go through and give you guys my official thoughts of each episode and where I rank them. So, with that being said, let's get into the ranking. So, easily in last place for me is Akakiri. For me, this one just didn't work on a whole lot of levels. I wasn't the biggest fan of the animation. I really wasn't the biggest fan of the story. And honestly, this is probably the episode out of all of Visions that I just got bored. I really honestly didn't really care what was happening in the story. The only bit of a positive I can really give is the ending. I do kind of like how essentially, in a weird way, this is kind of like a what if like Obi-Wan turned to the dark side to save Duchess Satine. This Jedi kind of does the same thing. He turns to the dark side in order to save the love of his life. But out of all that, that is really only the shred of a positive that I can give for this episode. Up next is from Visions Volume 2, and that is going to be I Am Your Mother. Now, for me, this was the weakest of Visions Volume 2. While I did have a little bit of a nostalgia for the animation that they did in this, because I did grow up watching Wallace and Gromit, and I know there was another show out called Shaun the Sheep, I believe it's called. I didn't get to watch that, but I did enjoy the animation enough for this, but the characters and really the story just didn't really get to me at all. The only other kind of a positive I can give is I love the Easter eggs of all the different ships and stuff that we have in here. You get to see the Mantis from Jedi Fallen Order. You get to see a different look of a Naboo starfighter that Padme was flying. And also, you do get a cameo from Wedge Antilles. Other than that, I really didn't enjoy this episode all too much. So, gonna be a little bit of a trend here you guys will see in terms of how I've really ranked Volume 2. So, but I Am Your Mother takes the number 17 spot. Up next is going to be Tatooine Rhapsody. Now, I'll be honest, this one really didn't bother me. I know for a lot of people that they put this a lot lower on the list. I know, especially watching the different rankings for the first volume of Visions, but I didn't really mind it. I kind of had a little bit of fun with this one. I didn't really mind the song either, what they were singing. It was a little weird that, this cousin to Jabba the Hutt needs to come back to Tatooine to, be alongside Jabba. So getting to see Jabba in that animation, also getting to see Boba Fett and the Slave One in this animation too, was actually kind of interesting to a degree. I Really didn't mind how this was paced. Again, this probably out of all of them was just the most fun. While I understand why a lot of people didn't really gravitate towards this one, I can still have fun watching this group of kids perform on the Boonta Eve and perform for Jabba the Hutt and everybody else. So, Tatooine Rhapsody kind of worked for me a little bit. Number 15 is going to be The Pit, and I'll be honest with you guys, I only put this above Tatooine Rhapsody mostly because of the animation and also the way that they actually represent the Empire in this. Because obviously we all know the darkness behind the Empire, but this one really shows it the most, how there's just this huge group of workers stuck literally in this pit. One of them is able to escape, goes to the city, and nobody listens to him. And in probably one of the darker episodes, they actually throw him back into the pit. And eventually all the people from the city come. They kind of circle around them, show them, help them get out. But really, to me, besides that, there's not much of a story. There really wasn't much for characters who really stood out to me at all. So, unfortunately for me, I would say this was probably the more boring episode out of the bunch of these, but I could still sit down and I could still enjoy this to some degrees. In the Stars takes the number 14 spot, and I'll be honest, this was actually the episode when I was watching the trailer. I was intrigued by when the TIE Fighter came down, but I was really nervous about this animation, along with another one that you are going to see higher up on the list, but I didn't really mind this one either. I like how in Visions Volume 2, these stories are just a little more personal. They're a little more familial, I guess we could say. How they focus a lot more on family in a lot of these episodes. But I will admit, when it came to the action scenes in here, they were a little wonky, I guess we can say. And other than that, that's really as far of any positives I can really give. I didn't mind the story. I liked seeing, the different representations of the Empire in this one as well. So, just kind of one that I think the animation could have been done better or done completely different. And I'll be honest, too, the main kid in here, didn't really like her very much. I really wasn't fond of her character or her voice acting by any means. So, that's what kind of drops this one down a lot lower as well. Au Song is number 13. This was another one where I watched it and I kind of thought this looked almost like Animal Crossing to some degree. While I've never played Animal Crossing, I have seen a lot of videos of it. But this one actually kind of surprised me out of the bunch as well, because while this being the last episode of Visions Volume 2, I think it ended on a decent note. I do think that the way that they actually tell the story in here about how she can't use her voice because if she starts to sing or does anything, that the kyber crystals will actually almost explode or almost do some damage to whoever's around them. And I also like too how, this planet that they're on, it's their job to, excavate these corrupted kyber crystals. They tell a little bit of a story at the beginning of the episode, which I really did find intriguing and I really did enjoy. But unfortunately, in terms of action, there really wasn't anything in here. This was just more of a personal story. I did like, again, the way that they handled the kyber crystals in here, and I thought it added quite a bit to the lore of kyber crystals. But other than that, this is another episode I probably won't be rushing to get back to. So, Au Song takes number 13. Number 11 is going to be The Spy Dancer, and this was another one in terms of animation that I was a little skeptical on as well. And this, at the beginning, it did kind of bother me. I didn't really like the way that the animation was going. But after a while, after the story did finally start to pick up, I really actually enjoyed this one quite a bit. Again, the more personal, more familial type of a story they tell in here with this woman who is a dancer at this cantina. She's just doing all these weird dances. She's actually a rebel in disguise. And I love how when they bring in the Empire, there's actually an officer that she kind of thinks that she remembers and has a bit of a flashback of when they took her son away from her. And it turns out that that Imperial officer is actually her son. She doesn't want to fight him. She doesn't want to do anything like that with him. They have a nice little touching moment at the end, and you do get to see that the son actually kind of takes aback of what happened. Actually, like, really thinks about what he is doing in the Empire. And so I've always loved stories like that, especially with the Empire, because it's very obvious that people by now know that the Empire is the most evil faction in all of Star Wars history. But this one was actually pretty surprising. This one was definitely one that I could watch again. Another one though I won't be in a rush to get back to though. Just barely missing the top 10 is TOB1 or Toby. This one was really very kiddish, I will say that. You know, this is probably the most kiddish episode of all of Volume 1. But, again, another one that the story actually grasped me. I like how, you know, this hidden Jedi who's pretending to be a scientist is working to try and go to these planets to bring life back. He has this little droid boy that he made who wants to be a Jedi. And ultimately, when the time comes around, he actually gets the opportunity to handle a lightsaber and actually gets to be a Jedi in the episode. The scene with him and the Inquisitor was actually one of the better action scenes as well out of all of Visions Volume 1 for me. And I genuinely enjoyed it. It's just for me, though, again, it was a little too childish. If it would have been a different kind of a droid, and if they would have done a little bit more with the colors, because the colors just, for me, didn't really work all that well in this episode either. Bringing us into the top 10, we have got the Village Bride. Now, this is actually the opposite of the previous episode I just talked about, because I actually loved the way that the colors were. The colors in this episode were so vibrant, so just almost aggressive. And I love the way that they kind of keep this Jedi secretive, how she's wearing this mask. She doesn't really have a whole lot of dialogue in the episode either. And I just, even the little bit of action you get, while it's not exciting, you don't really get a whole lot of action in this episode either. I will say, though, that for me, animation-wise and color-wise is why I put it up so much higher. I just wish there was more action in here. I even really like the, I don't know if you want to really call him a sidekick or what you want to call him, but the gentleman that the female Jedi is with throughout the entire episode. I actually really liked him. He is probably my favorite character in that whole episode. Screecher's Reach takes the number 9 spot. This was actually the one next to In the Stars that I was honestly the most skeptical of watching, because I really thought that this was going to be the most childish episode of the series. And this actually is one of, if not the most dark tales in this. These group of kids, they leave this mining factory, they go off into this other side of the planet where they go and they are exploring. They're trying to find out if this legend is true. And it actually turns out it is true. We get it almost changes. It turns into like an adventure and then into a mystery, and then it almost turns into a full-out horror. So that is one huge reason why I put it up higher, because I am a huge horror fan. And for me, I will be honest, I, again, am in shock at how much I actually genuinely like this episode. Just for me, though, I will say the voice acting is really what got me in this episode. I didn't really think it was all that great, and especially our main character. I thought she was actually the weakest character of the episode. But I genuinely loved seeing that ghostly Sith inside of the cavern. So, Screecher's Reach, probably the most surprising of Volume 2 for me. takes the number 9 spot. Up next, we got the Bandits of Golak. And this was actually the one I was probably the most excited to see overall in Visions, because I got a lot of Clone Wars and Rebels vibes watching the animation of this, especially when the female Jedi shows off her 2 lightsabers. For whatever reason, I got a lot of vibes of just Clone Wars in general. But for me, while I like the animation, while I like the battle at the end, to me, I really wasn't overly invested in the 2 main characters. I really didn't like the main girl who ended up being our hidden Jedi, our Force sensitive, I guess we can say. And her brother was okay at best, in my opinion. I thought he was a little stronger than her as a character. But ultimately, this was an episode where I could have had some more. I liked the action scene at the end, but kind of fell a little bit more flat for me. But again, for me, it's the animation that really gives this one the bigger boost. Up next is Sith, and I know for a lot of people, this was the episode they were looking forward to the most. Ironically enough, in terms of story-wise, because this is actually the episode that kicks off Volume 2, the story is kind of honestly similar to the Duel episode with the Ronin and the other female Sith Lord that he fights. It's almost very similar to that story. And of course, too, a huge reason I was excited for this episode is because I got a lot of vibes of Into the Spider-Verse with the animation style they chose for this. So that does put it up quite a ways. I also like, too, how they use the colors in this. Like, the color palette in here was a little weird, because there's rooms where she goes in and they're basically almost completely white. She uses the Force. She's able to move the colors around and make them look a little different. And, of course, when the actual villain Sith Lords show up, everything starts to become a lot more dark. She then finally defeats them, gets away from them, gets her own colors, makes her own story. I thought that was really nice and very unique for a story here. But, unfortunately, again, for me, it's voice acting that really drops this down a little bit more in my score. I don't know what it was with Season 2, but a lot of the voice acting just really does not work for me. Just barely missing the top 5 is going to be the twins. I know for a lot of people, they genuinely love this episode. And I love the concept, and I love the story of this episode as well. How these 2 twins are created from the dark side. How they are basically ruling the Empire simultaneously. They each have their own ship. They each do their own things. And the brother just doesn't want to be a part of it anymore. He wants to go on his own path. He doesn't feel as though he belongs with the Empire. And we get easily the most over-the-top lightsaber duel of all of Visions, with these 2 twins fighting on top of a Star Destroyer in space with these gigantic lightsabers, where the sister has 6 arms with 6 lightsabers. The action is just so crazy and over the top. It was just so much fun to watch this episode. But while that was fun, while I liked the action, I liked the story, this is the one where the animation didn't overly work for me, especially once the brother actually loses his armor, because I love the look of the characters with their armor on. Unfortunately, animation-wise, it just fell flat for me. Bringing us into the top 5 is The Duel, and I really feel like this is probably the episode that most people are going to put as a number 1, or put a lot more farther to the top than I did. And I do genuinely really like this episode. I love the look of this. You feel like you're watching an old school Akira Kurosawa film. And even too, just the way how they were able to mesh that old school samurai film within the realm of Star Wars. Still having lightsabers, still having droids and blasters and lightsabers and all that stuff was awesome. But there were also times, I will say, that the animation didn't really look all that great. I didn't really like the look of the female Sith Lord that we get in this episode. I thought she was probably the worst. But I will say, in terms of why I put this at number 5, is I do wish we could have got more of this episode. Got a little bit more of a backstory on the Ronin as to why he is no longer a Sith. He has a red lightsaber, but he doesn't believe in the Sith ways anymore. And I'll be honest with you guys, too, that's actually, as far as negatives for the upcoming episodes that I'm going to talk about here, that's really my only negative for the next couple. So, but the Duel is here at number 5. Number 4 is Lop and Ocho. I've got to be honest with this episode. This is one I definitely believe should have been an entire season. This was actually the episode that made me think, wow, there are lots of episodes in Visions that should just be their own singular season. I love the animation of this one. I loved it. Just reminded me so much of all the old school animes that I used to watch growing up that it really sucked me in very effectively, I guess we'll say. I love the character of Lop. I actually thought she was an intriguing character. I love, too, how they, work with her very well, how they decide to actually finally invite her into the family. The sister goes to join the Empire. It's a family battle. Lop decides to stay with the father. The father gets attacked by them. She ends up taking him eventually. And the father accepts Lop to finally being his daughter, giving him the family lightsaber. And the action sequence in here was awesome. I genuinely wish that this could have been either a longer episode or been a full season by itself. All right, you guys, we are here at the top 3. If you haven't already, make sure you guys go down below in the comments section. Let me know your guys' favorite episode of Star Wars Visions. And now I gotta be completely honest with you guys. Possibly, depending on the day, these next 3 could easily switch. Because I'll be honest, again, like I said when I was talking about the Duel, my real only negative with these upcoming 3, and they're more nitpicks this time around, is I wish these would have been full seasons. I genuinely believe that as a season, each of these stories would work a lot better, and I feel like could really suck more Star Wars fans into watching this. So, bringing us into the top 3 is Journey to the Dark Head. This, to me, hands down, is the best episode of Visions Volume 2 by a landslide. I was actually under the impression, too, that this actually was made from Japan, but it turns out this is actually South Korea that actually made this episode, which made me fall in love with it even more because I'm somebody who over the last 3-4 years has become such a huge fan of Korean cinema. I genuinely have fallen so in love with the way that South Korea does their animation, does their movies and all that. And I actually found out that the animation company who actually made this actually did Legend of Korra, which I actually just got done watching earlier this year, and I genuinely really enjoyed that. But it also was kind of mixed together with some animation from Death Note is really what I got, especially in terms of our Sith. I love the Jedi character. I really didn't mind our female lead. I just kind of wish we would have gotten a little more from her. This was more centered on the Jedi and the Sith Lord who were in this episode. And I genuinely love the lightsaber duel between these two. It has everything you want from a lightsaber duel in Star Wars. It has ferocity. It is fast-paced. It is action-packed. And it's very emotional because, of course, you find out that this Sith Lord killed his master earlier on in the episode when we get a flashback. And I also just love, too, the concept of this planet, about how these two heads are represented in this. About how later on in the episode you find out if you destroy one, you're going to destroy the other because the light cannot survive without the dark. And I always have loved that concept in Star Wars. It's the same thing, too, obviously, the Jedi and the Sith. That is what this is centered around. But again, my only nitpick with this episode is I genuinely think this should have been a full season. The story could have been so far expanded. You could have gotten a full episode about our young female character, kind of taking back her time of this planet she's living on. The next episode could have been focused solely on our Jedi character and having a flashback of his master getting killed. And then you could have focused a whole nother episode on the Sith. And then you could have gone into a different direction with these guys all meeting together. Genuinely, I think this was a missed opportunity for Visions Volume 2. And regardless, this is still the best episode of Volume 2 by a landslide. Our runner-up is The Elder. I will be honest, in terms of why I enjoyed this episode so much, is to me at times this feels so much like The Phantom Menace. Our two lead Jedi, the Padawan and the Master, are so similar to Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon from Episode 1. That is the other reason I fell so in love with this episode, because I love their dynamic, I love their chemistry together. The Elder character himself, too, I absolutely love the design of this character. To me, he seems like a combination of Darth Maul and Emperor Palpatine. Because later on in the episode, when he uses that Sith lightning and he's got the yellow Sith eyes, to me it was just one of the most haunting things of watching this episode. And I love, too, the actual duel between the Jedi Master, I don't know his name, so I apologize, and the Elder, was not only just old school samurai related fighting choreography between them, but again, I just had so many vibes of watching Qui-Gon versus Darth Maul in this. So it might honestly be my favorite lightsaber duel of all of Visions, tied with Journey to the Darkhead. I'm going really back and forth between which one I love the most, but I genuinely think this episode is flawless. Again, my only nitpick is I wanted a full season of this. But coming in at number 1 for me is the Ninth Jedi. This to me is the best of not only just Volume 1, but of all of Star Wars Visions in general. I fell in love with this episode. I love the concept of this episode, the story of this episode, of this man who's a blacksmith on this planet. He is creating these lightsabers for these Jedi who are supposed to be arriving to meet this sage-like character up on the moon. And the daughter is taking the lightsabers up to the planet where she gets attacked by bandits. And I love the way that they represent the lightsabers in this. The fact that you really don't know what kind of a Jedi you are, so when you activate the lightsaber, it's just a transparent blade. And I love that concept, how when you get it into somebody's hands, after they activate it, you'll see what kind of a person they are, whether it be red, whether it be green, whether it be blue, or any other colors. I just love that concept. The action in this, too, genuinely is the best. And I fell absolutely in love with the way that this was paced as well. And the other reason I put this in such high regards, too, is the actual way they reveal who these Jedi are at the end of the episode, where there's actually only one Jedi out of this group of 7 people who are there. He activates his saber, it's blue. The rest of the Jedi around him activate their lightsabers. They are all Sith red. And it comes to find out that this sage-like character actually brought them all there so that he could destroy the rest of the Sith. And the action in this was just so intense. You really didn't know what was going to happen as you were watching it. And again, to me, this is the episode that hands down needs an entire season. Or even a short animated film or something. Like, to me, this hands down is peak storytelling for Visions. And I just would love for them to come back to this story. And again, even the top three that I talked about, I'd love them to come back to them stories. Like I said, make them into their own little animated movie or make them into their own animated series, whatever they want to do. Because this to me is some of honestly the best storytelling in Star Wars all around. And guys, that is going to do it for my ranking of all 18 episodes of Star Wars Visions. Let me know down below in the comments section if you guys agree. You guys can let me know what your favorite episode is. Or also you can just tell me what your least favorite episode is. Either way, guys, we're going to disagree. That is totally fine. We all have different tastes when it comes to this show. And with that being said, you guys, make sure you hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. And we'll see you in the next one.